give you guys a chance to go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, so let me try to do my screen sharing again. Then we'll move down. So remember, firms in competitive industry, they want to maximize their profits, which is their difference between total revenue and total cost. And so the plan here is to go ahead and go through these things, and then look at what's going to be coming next in terms of the homework. So hopefully this kind of table looks familiar, and we have the total revenue and the total cost and the marginal revenue and the marginal cost. Remember, our main rule, the one that we talked about last time, is that we want to look for when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and that's going to show the profit maximizing level of output. So for example, here you can see that you have a marginal cost of 6 when you're producing the 5th unit, and there the total cost is 23 and the total revenue is 30, so the profit is 7 and profit is maximized. Last time we talked about that, yeah, sure, you got also a maximum at 4, but there's no good rule for that. So it's a little bit of a mathematical anomaly, meaning it's unpredictable. But you can always predict that profits will be maximized when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, which happens with this 5th unit. And then, for you guys in particular, as you're going to solve the problems on Ignithium, then these types of graphs are especially important. So, if you were going to ask me, like, what would I do? You could either look in your book, or you could, skip to the section of the videos that had these and maybe take a picture of them on your phone. But because on Ignithium, most of the stuff that we're doing, it doesn't have to do with data that's displayed in tables. Rather, they're graphs, and you're interpreting the graphs. These are the types of slides that are going to be most helpful in terms of solving the problems. So notice that we have here the price of the product, and you have the marginal costs, and you have marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue where they cross. And so that Q max is the profit maximizing quantity. So this is the stuff that I wanted to review since we had a week off, and before we move on any further. So again, this is your main rule, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, is the profit maximizing quantity of output for the firm. And then we talked about this a little bit last time, but if you have marginal revenue greater than marginal cost, then that's a signal that the firm will want to increase its level of output. It's kind of helpful. Marginal revenue is the amount of money the firm is making on a unit that it produces when it sells it. And the marginal cost is how much it costs to produce this unit. So if you really had this information, you understood what it meant, it would be very transparent what the firm would want to do. Obviously, if they can sell something for more than it costs them to make it, they want to make that unit. And because marginal cost decreases you or increases you produce more because of diminishing marginal returns, that they'll want to continue producing. And likewise, if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, they would want to produce less and bring their marginal costs down. And then finally, for the unit's going to maximize their profits, that's going to happen where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. I'll go back just a second, and hopefully this will illustrate more clearly what the point is. Notice that the marginal costs are increasing. That's what I was talking about a minute ago when I looked at that first line, and I said, well, obviously, if the firm is at a point like Q1, the cost of producing that unit is far less than the revenue they can get from selling it. And then that's a signal to them they can produce more because they'll have diminishing marginal productivity, or what we call diminishing returns. And that means their costs are going to be increasing as they produce more. So if they're at a point where marginal cost is less than marginal revenue, they can produce more profitably. And if they're at a point like Q2, obviously they can reduce their costs, holding their revenue constant by producing less. So anyway, hopefully that's clear. If you guys have any questions about it, then just let me know. So the other thing that we talked about, and I mentioned last time, this graph isn't quite right, because the bracketed portion should go all the way down to where the marginal cost curve crosses the average variable cost curve. But that segment above the minimum of the average variable cost curve, that's the supply curve of the competitive firm. And then we talked a little bit about, oh, well, there's this shutdown rule. And what the shutdown rule means is that, sometimes firms won't produce because, like, for example, we talked about last time, there are lots of firms that have shut down because of what's going on with the quarantine rules and the pandemic. And even if they were allowed to stay open because they were able to, have social distancing measures and the rest of it, because they have a decrease in the opportunity to sell because there are fewer customers, it just might not be worth it for them to stay open. So I don't know if you guys know any businesses that I mean, so right now I don't think it would be possible for Disneyland to be open. But when they first shut down, they weren't ordered to, and there are probably lots of things that went into their decision, but one of them was that obviously, not that many people are going to want to go to Disneyland right now. So all of the costs of operating the park, to keep it open for just a few people, would make it unprofitable, and that's what's happening at the bottom of the average variable cost curve. So yeah, this is what the firm's true supply curve looks like, and notice how it produces nothing when the price is below the average variable cost, and then once a price jumps above the minimum of average variable cost, then the firm produces according to its marginal cost curve. Okay, so now the one thing that we didn't take into consideration was the difference between short run and long run decisions. So this is an example of the firm's short run supply curve. Its long run supply curve actually is going to be based on the minimum of the average total cost curve. So notice it says MC is equal to long run supply in this example. And there's a big long discussion about what it means to be in the short run versus what it means to be in the long run. And I think that the simplest way to get at the issue is that the whole notion of fixed costs have to do with the firms having some short run obligations. And so, for example, they lease or they rent a building and they have it under contract for a year. Well, even if they shut down, there's nothing they can do. They still have to pay those lease payments. So as long as they're obligated to make some payment of some sort, they're in a short run operating mindset. It means they have to cover their fixed costs. But in the long run, they have enough time to plan where they could do an entirely online store or they could expand their operation, but they don't have any fixed component to their costs. So one of the ways of thinking about short run versus long run is to say in the long run the firms have no fixed costs because fixed costs are related to fixed inputs in their production process, and in the long run they can plan to produce however they want, so they don't have any fixed obligation in terms of employing certain amounts of machinery or having a rental obligation. So technically speaking, I'll tell you guys that the definition of the short run has nothing to do explicitly with an amount of time. It's not like 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. And that's one of the things that confuses students. I sometimes ask students in lecture, I say, well, how long is the short run? And they say, oh, 3 weeks or 3 months or something like that. And it's not true. The definition of the short run is any length of time where the firm has at least one fixed factor of production, one thing they can't change. And however long that lasts until they have enough time to be able to change it, that's the short run. And then once all factors are variable, then you're in the long run. Well, the reason why that's important is because this average total cost curve illustrated in this diagram, you might think that this is the same average total cost curve that you see in this diagram of the short run, but it's not. The long run average total cost curve, and actually if this graph was trying to make the same point more carefully, then I'd actually be, and in some textbooks, in some contexts, you'll see it's labeled the LRATC, the long run average total cost curve, because it's an entirely different relationship to the costs and the level of output than what occurs in the short run. So you notice that in the long run diagram, there is no average variable cost curve because in truth, all of the costs in the long run are variable. So I could label this curve either ATC or ABC and they would be the same. The reason that there's a difference in the short run is because in the short run there are fixed costs. And the fixed costs are what's causing the gap between the variable costs and the average total cost. So, okay, I guess enough is said about that. One of the things I will put in the chat really quickly because it seems like it's a good place to put it, is this note, which is the average total cost is equal to the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. Okay. And in the long run, AFC is equal to 0. So now you guys can see that the ATC would be equal to the ABC when we're operating in the long run. Okay. So let's take a look at, because this is important too when we want to identify profits in our problems in Ignithium. So we know we have prices equal to marginal revenue. So this marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is going to identify the profit maximizing quantity. But you can write profit as price minus average total cost times quantity, which gives you the area of this rectangle. And so I will again put a note in the chat to try to explain that a little bit more. So remember, for the competitive firm, and this is only for the competitive firm, price is equal to marginal revenue. Okay, and profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. Okay, so total revenue by definition is equal to price. Oop, I lost something there. Is equal to price times the quantity of the goods sold. And average total cost by definition is equal to total cost divided by the quantity sold. Okay, so that means that we can write profit as equal to, and I'll just be explicit, I'll say it's P times Q, right? And then notice that, and I'll do this in a minute, we can also write total cost as average total cost times Q. So that's one way that we can write profit. But then notice you can factor out the Q from that equation, and you end up with price minus ATC times Q. Okay. And I always like it. I remember profit as total revenue minus total cost, but I always also remember that profit can be represented as price minus average total cost times quantity, because it corresponds to the area of that rectangle on the diagram. So the only other thing that's a little bit missing from this is notice that from our equation, ATC is equal to TC, total cost, divided by Q, that we can write ATC multiplying both sides by Q of that equation times Q is equal to TC. Okay, so that should complete the explanation of what you're seeing on this diagram. So marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue at that crossing point, and then we can see this, and it's called a profit rectangle. This profit rectangle on our diagram. So we can measure the firm's profit. We could see how much profit it was making just by reading it off of the diagram. Now, it's also possible, and what they're showing you in this diagram is, remember that if the firm doesn't make a profit, if it's making negative profits, we call that a loss. And so, you know, if it was the case that average total cost was greater than the price, then that area would correspond to the amount of the loss that the firm was making. So profits and losses are just the same idea, but it's, you know, a negative of the other, a negative of profit is loss. So we can measure it the same way on our diagram. And also, we would say that, you know, maximizing profits is consistent with minimizing losses. So If the firm can't maximize its profit, then it will, um, operate by minimizing its losses. Um, okay. So now we want to talk about, I want to be clear that all of the things that we were talking about up here have to do with the operation of the competitive firm. So how does one business operate in a competitive market? So now we want to talk about how do we get to a market supply curve when all firms are operating to maximize their profits? How much stuff do we know they're going to maximize their individual profits, and that's going to determine how much they're going to supply to the market. But how much is going to be supplied by all those firms collectively to the market if they're all trying to operate to maximize their profits? So we have to aggregate or add up those individual supply decisions of the individual firms in the market to get the market supply curve. So what you do is at each and every price, you add up the quantities that each of the firms in the market would produce, and that gives you the supply of the good at the market level. So here's an example where, remember, we're dealing primarily with the marginal cost curve of the individual firm. That's its supply function, right? And so this example says, well, okay, at $1, if the price was $1, the firm would set price equal to marginal cost. It would produce 100 units, right? Well, what if there were 1,000 such firms, right, in the market? So at $1, you would multiply that amount by 1,000, and this would give you 1 point on the market supply curve. So if there are 1,000 firms in the market. Likewise, at $2, one firm would supply 200 units, but 1,000 such firms would supply 200,000 units. So we add up the quantities at all of the firms in the market. And in this example, there are 1,000 such firms. But if there were only 2, right, or there were only 3, or if there were only 10, the quantities in the market would be different, even if each of them individually was supplying according to the same supply function as the individual firm, because there just aren't as many firms as there were. So there's not as much being supplied to the market. Okay. And so to be clear and make sure that we don't mix things up any, this is all talking about supply in general, and particularly the short run supply decisions of the firm. Now we want to talk about a decision that we mentioned before last time, which is the decision of the firm to either enter or exit the market, which is entering is starting up a brand new business, and exiting is permanently shutting down. Remember, we said that the decision of a firm to shut down was a short run decision to temporarily produce zero while they waited for market conditions to improve. So for example, Disney hasn't exited the theme park market. They're just not having anybody go to their theme park right now, but they plan to open up later. So they're shutting down, but they're not exiting. But if Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm, if this economic condition persisted for too long, eventually they would have to just sell off their assets and get out of the theme park business. Well, when firms get out permanently, they have no plans to produce anymore. That's called exiting, and it's a long run decision. And the interesting thing is that if we look at the long run average total cost curve, and so the features of competition are that no firm has any special advantage to technology or access. All the firms are identical and they produce identical products. Well, if you really push that to its limit, then you say, oh, well, there's an interesting observation here. And that is that, remember, when price jumps up above the long run average total cost curve, then firms are going to be producing along their marginal cost curve. But remember, price minus average total cost is a profit, right? So these firms, if price goes above the minimum of the average total cost, they're going to be producing a profit. And if it goes below the minimum of average total cost, they'll be producing a loss. And this is either a long run profit or a long run loss. Well, they don't have any fixed costs. So unlike the firms in the short run who might continue to produce for a while to cover some of their fixed costs in the short run, in the long run, firms don't have any such motivation. So if they're earning a profit, other firms will enter the market and start up. That profit in the long run is a signal that it's a profitable industry, and other firms can come in and begin producing too. And in the long run, if there's a loss, the firms will exit. So what that tells you is that all firms in the long run will be stuck at a position where price is equal to the minimum of average total cost. And what that means is that you can have effectively, now obviously this is a theoretical idea, um, which means that there are constraints in reality, which would mean that it wouldn't apply perfectly. But the idea is a sound one, that at price is equal to minimum average total cost in the long run, you can get an infinite quantity supplied, or what we called before a perfectly elastic supply curve, this horizontal supply curve at the market level. Okay. And that's because firms are going to be jumping in and out of the market. And that's going to, if they jump into the market, it increases supply, it's going to push the price down. If they exit the market, it's going to decrease supply, it'll push the price up. And so they'll be hovering around this price equals minimum average total cost, and as much that needs to be supplied for the entire economy can be supplied at that level. The interesting thing is that if price is equal to average total cost, remember that profits are zero. So what this tells you is that not only do you get in, potentially infinite quantity supplied, but you get it supplied at zero economic profit for the firms. Now, I tried to tell you guys before that zero profit sounds like a bad thing, but it's really not, because remember, it's your revenue minus your total economic costs. And remember, your economic costs aren't just the cost of labor and materials, but they include a normal rate of return. So from an accounting perspective, these businesses that are earning zero economic profit are actually making an accounting profit. They're making 7% per year, which is the average um, rate of return or profit for businesses in the US economy over time. And the nice thing is that when the market's competitive, that these average total costs are driven to be equal to the price of the product. And the nice thing about that is, like, from a consumer perspective, is competition good for consumers? Sure, it drives down prices to the point where firms are producing at their minimum possible cost per unit. Cost per unit is the average total cost. And if you think about it, that's really like the virtue, the good thing for society about competition is, and if you guys have ever seen a really competitive industry, you know what I'm talking about. So I think a really good example, and the one that's probably closest to something that you guys have experience with, is the retail distribution of wine, beer, and liquor. So I'll ask you guys a question. and so do you think well, first of all, the first question, and I'll put this in the chat, is who is involved? So give an example. In the retail distribution of wine, beer, and I'll use spirits for liquor. So if you'd like to answer the question, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, so then I'll sing my song. If you don't know the answer, raise your hand. You guys remember how to raise your hand, right? You go down to the participants button. If you don't know if you don't know the answer, raise your hand. Okay. So I saw Zach put up his hand. Where are you, Zach? You have your mic?
I said if you don't know, raise it.
Yeah. So you don't know, but what do you think? Who sells beer?
Who? Coors Light.
Well, I said retail.
Oh, retail.
So retail means where do you go buy your beer? Or you don't buy beer?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So if your dad told you go out and get me some beer, are you 21 yet, Zach?
Well, yeah. Normally, like I have an older brother, and if he's having friends over, he'll just go to the 7-Eleven around the corner and get like a 30-pack.
Yeah, so 7-Eleven. That's exactly what I was thinking about. But are there any other places that sell, beer?
Usually my dad waits till he sees like some deal in the like Stater Bros coupons or
Something like that.
Albertsons, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you know what I was actually thinking about? So, like, I have just around the corner from me, there's a little liquor store. It's an independent liquor store, right? It's just this little place. You go in there and you can buy lottery tickets, cigarettes, and chips and beer. It's like 7-Eleven, but it's not like a brand name, So you have places like that around you? I mean, there are a lot of them around me.
Yeah, I could think of one for sure, maybe two.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you got on Google and you hit the little buttons and said beer near me, how many like little retail liquor stores you would see. But I'm telling you, they're all over the place, right? So my next question, and somebody else can answer this question, and that is, do you think? Well, I'll say, how much profit do you think retailers of beer, wine, and spirits make? Okay, so is there anybody that wants to answer that question? Okay, so Charmaine, you have your hand up.
Do you want like a number or?
Well, I don't know if he could give me a number.
Like a percentage of?
Well, okay, yeah. So yeah. So Chris says it depends on who the retailer is. That's true, right? But if you think about these little liquor stores around here, and actually, there's one just down the street on Temple from Cal Poly. I don't know if you guys have noticed it. It's by the Carl's Jr. when you go to campus. But how much money do you think those guys are making from selling their beer?
I think like a good amount, I guess.
Well, okay, so what's a good amount to you? Now remember, right? They got to pay for their rent. They got to pay for the people, either that or they own it themselves. Like the guy that has a liquor store near me, I'm sure that it's a family-run business. Sure of it. So, how much do you think those guys are making?
Maybe 30%.
Yeah, 30%? You like markup? I don't know.
Like
I don't.
60, 70.
So, have you ever thought like, gosh, there's like so much, they're making so much money. I want to open a little liquor store of my own. They're like rolling in it. Have you ever been tempted, Charmaine?
No.
No. Like, I don't know that anybody out there really thinks, oh my gosh, like there's a huge amount of money in owning a liquor store. Like, I got to do it, right? It's not like, you know, people, dreaming of making millions in Bitcoin. It's like, well, yeah, I would guess, and I think that you're kind of right. They probably do pretty well, right? Meaning that they work, and I notice, I think hard, right? They're stocking the place, they got to pay their rent, and they got to pay for their liquor license and their other taxes and all that other stuff. So probably they make 100, for them to take home in their pocket, like $100,000 a year, you know, maybe 150. But I don't know that, like, there aren't like little kids out in the street. I don't think many of them thinking like, yeah, I'm gonna be a baller. When I grow up, I'm gonna get me a little liquor store and I'm just gonna make mad stacks, right? No, right? You think, okay, if you really want to make, big money and you're intelligent and hardworking, like, I'll be a brain surgeon, or I'll, maybe I'll try to get into the music industry, and maybe, I could be like Ariana Grande or whatever. But you don't think, yeah, a liquor store. And the point that I'm trying to make is that, and what you guys might think of is like the margins are relatively small. And that's because it's so competitive. It's one of the things that we heard earlier from Zach, that, yeah, sure, you could go down. I go to my little liquor store, one, to support local business because I'm glad that he's there, and two, because, um, you know, every once in a while, because it's really, really close and not that many people are in there, I can go in and get something cold and come out, and it's convenient. But if I really want to buy beer, I'll look for the sales, and, I'll go to Costco or I'll go to Stater Brothers. So there's a limit. And so hopefully you guys can kind of see the forces of competition mean that the markups, or, you know, the additional profit that's available in those industries is small. So we get cold beer at a good price, um, because it's competitive. So anyway, I don't know if anybody else has a comment on that, but that's what this graph is telling us, and these comments below. Um, and in particular, the point at which, and this is one of the questions in Ignithium, where the marginal cost curve crosses the minimum of the average total cost curve, is the efficient scale of operation, because it means the units that are being produced at that least possible cost per unit. And that's what competition does for us. So you know, I mean, economists talk about that a lot, about efficiency and it being good for society. But if you ever really wonder if competition is good for society and you think about, corporate giants and all the rest of it, you might go down and get a good deal on a cold beer at your local liquor store and come back and contemplate it. Because, the reason why you're getting a good deal on stuff like that is because there's lots of competition. Um, you know, Normally, if you think about, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but the the parts of that people don't like about large corporate entities isn't has nothing to do with competition or capitalism exactly, because generally there's some monopoly issues involved there, and it's not traditional competition. Does anybody have a comment or want to say anything? Because I'm happy to hear from you guys. Um, I was just trying to make the point um, transparent, because I know the graphs and the math can seem a little bit um, hard to connect the point, but that's what they're telling us. So, so now I just want to do a little bit more to follow up. But if you guys do have a comment or a question, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and talk, or put something in the chat, and I'll try to see it. But so now we have this relationship between the firm and the market, and notice we have this long run supply curve that's horizontal, and it's passing through this same demand and supply equilibrium, where the short run supply curve is an upward sloping supply curve. So this is where we normally start our analysis. Here's the firm level and here's the market level. These are the initial conditions. This is the firm level initial condition, because it shows the price and the marginal revenue. The firm's making its profit, but it's making zero profit. We're in a long run equilibrium. So this is the equilibrium in the long run at the firm level and the market level. So what happens next? Well, there's some disturbance. There's an increase in demand, and then we could go back to our analysis of demand and supply that we did at the beginning of the semester, and we could say, oh well, why did demand for this good increase? It could be lots of different things, as we found out. It could be having to do with the changes in the prices of substitutes and complements. It could be a change in consumers' tastes. So there's lots of things that could cause demand to increase. But for some reason, demand is increased. And then notice we move from point A to point B. And from point A to point B is our new short run equilibrium at a higher price and a larger quantity. And we move along the short run because, again, this is just an initial disturbance. There hasn't been time for long run planning by the firms to adjust their capacity for new firms to enter and things like that. But also note that we end up getting a profit rectangle as the firm moves up its marginal cost curve. So now firms are making a positive profit greater than zero profit. And remember, zero profit is like you're making a good amount of money, but when you're making greater than zero profit, that's like you're making money hand over fist. And it attracts additional competitors to enter into the market. And so the best example I can give you guys in my lifetime has really been Starbucks. Because if you go back, I can remember when Starbucks first started opening in California, there was no coffee shop culture. There weren't. Now I see lots of independent coffee shops around me too, and in addition to Starbucks. But what happened was, I think I had my first cup of Starbucks coffee like in 1997 in Santa Barbara. But then you noticed right away there were new Starbucks locations and new independent coffee shops popping up all the time. Because, I mean, think about it, right? If And back then, that was before Starbucks offered you, you know, college tuition assistance and all this other stuff that's driven up their costs. But if you can take a cup of milk and sell it for $5, you know, that seems like a pretty good business. And you guys know coffee is cheap and stuff like that. One time I walked into Starbucks because I used to go there pretty regularly in the morning. It was on my way to school, and so, but I would only go in a couple days a week. And I said to them, they said, well, you know, we only see you a couple times. Like, where are you going when you're not coming here to get your coffee? And I said, well, you know, I have Folgers Instants at home, and the, it was like, you know, crickets. And then the person at the register gasped, and they said, oh, we never say the F word around here, which was Folgers, right? So, so the point is, they knew that they were making far more money, um, you know, selling these relatively cheap products, um, and making them there and marking them up. But everybody else caught on, and I don't know if you guys know this, but it's been about almost 10 years now. But right around the time of the Great Recession, a lot of Starbucks locations closed. Um, there wasn't enough business. So the point is that because it was such a good business opportunity, it attracted a lot of entry. It increased the supply dramatically. But in the short run, Starbucks profits were incredible. Now, as we move into the long run, what happens you see is the short run supply curve shifts, and you get a new long run equilibrium where profits go back down to normal levels. By the way, I should mention that zero equilibrium profit in the long run is referred to as normal profit in economics. So this shows the whole transition of an increase in demand and an increase in supply, and how it relates to the diagrams that we've looked at before, and how to incorporate a long run supply curve. And notice that the firm, as the price drops back down to the long run level, because of entry, it's earning zero profits again. Okay, so does anybody have any questions for me about any of that stuff? If you do, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing then, and I'm gonna see if okay, let's do this and move this around, and okay, so can you guys all see this is our next homework assignment, which is homework assignment 17. Can everybody see that? If you can't see it, just go ahead and raise your hand.
We can see it.
Okay, good. So let me move things out of the way here a little bit. So so this is kind of like what we were talking about before. So you guys did homework 16 already. So it says, so this is for one firm in a competitive industry. If there are 10 such firms in a competitive industry, how much is produced in the industry if all earn zero profits? So, and so if you guys look at the labels here, zero profit, right? This isn't long run, this is short run. So, and these are labeled short runs. So zero short run profit, I should be able to take away that line, right? And then it's highlighted here where ATC is equal to MC, right? So that's going to be where profits are zero. And it says there are 13.2 units. So let's see. Well, you guys know it's going to give me this big long equation. So what I'm going to do is move the stuff around a little bit, and so I'll open this one in a new tab, and then I'll just pick, oh, that one's blank. I'll pick, this should still be open. And I'll just get the calculator set up. And then I'll go back here and okay. I go home there, practice, and we'll go to 17. And now it's a little bit different, but so it's 13.11. So if I just multiply that by 10, I should get 131.1. Submit. And then it looks a little bit ugly there, but there we go. And so it says 131.06, but that's close enough. It would be scored correctly to the 131. So, and here we're talking about long run. So remember the trick here, and if you guys do the practice, you'll see this, is that I think what they're trying to get us to do is say, well, there are no fixed costs in the long run. So should we just be paying attention to the AVC, because all costs are variable in the long run. And here it's $96 per unit is where that crossing point is. So, and I'm sure we're going to get another hideous long equation, but I said 134. So maybe they meant, yeah, okay, so I guess in this case they want us to assume that the variable cost goes away and this becomes our long run. So I, you know, will be yeah, so that's the square root function. So if you guys go ahead and look through these and just bear in mind, right? So it seems like the assumption here that they're making is that this is going to become the long run average total cost curve, and that's fine, as long as they're consistent. You guys understand what's going on. And normal economic profit, well, it should always be 0. So that's fine. And so, and then the rest of these are just some questions about the difference between short run and long run. And you guys should be able to answer those pretty straightforwardly. So do you guys have any questions for me? Is there anything else that I can help you guys out with? No. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and you know, post the assignment like I normally do on Blackboard, and well, hold on just a minute and let me finish up, because I see a question. So I'll post the homework, and then I'll give some assignment for you guys for Thursday. And so I will then see you a little bit later. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and